Final day of OTAs today, and I expect that we're going to get some media takeaways from OTAs because Dan Campbell did have his media presser this morning. However, I wanted to make this quick episode to just update what Dan Campbell told us this morning, and then later tonight we'll be back with seemingly some of the media takeaways that we're going to get from the final day of OTAs. Now, that may be later tonight just because of my schedule. However, this was an important presser for Dan Campbell because he had an opportunity to talk about the Frank Ragnow situation that we really haven't heard about outside of him just retiring. So we're going to talk about some of the nuggets that he gave us today, and then later tonight we'll be back with some of the media takeaways. So let's get right into it. Let's start it off, of course, with the biggest story, which is Frank Ragnow. And he started this off by talking about how good of a teammate he's been, Frank Ragnow as a player, of course, and then also in the community. And he gave his favorite, basically, moment from Frank Ragnow, which was the 4th-and-1. Craig Reynolds scores the touchdown against Tampa Bay, and he has to essentially get off of one knee and push Vita Vea out of the way to open up that lane. And weirdly enough, that's the play that I always think of Frank Ragnow as well, because you got the big guy lined up there. He kind of drops to a knee and he kind of just does everything he can to just create a little bit of an opening for Craig Reynolds to just get through to score a touchdown. And we did score on a 4th-and-1 play. I always think of that play too, because Vita Vea is not only one of the best, but that is a massive person to move, an incredible athlete to move. And he did just enough to make it happen. And I think that play really did represent just the grit of Frank Ragnow. When you think about that, you think about all the injuries that he's played through, the toughness that he showcased, and that one play kind of bottled that all up into who Frank Ragnow really is. And outside of that, just being incredibly talented. And even Dan Campbell recognized that he felt like, okay, Frank Ragnow was coming off of one of his best seasons. He's in his prime. This is as healthy as he's been in a while. He felt good about that. However, he had known, and the Lions were aware, that this was a decision that he was contemplating, though he never seemingly gave them a yes or a no before like the draft or something. They did kind of give him his space. They knew this was something that he was contemplating. And of course, as we've talked about, they added pieces to be prepared for this, specifically in the draft. And he talked about free agency and having a guy like Kingsley Eguakun, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, but he gave him his space, and they said that they had been in contact with him. They had told us that, but then ultimately he made that decision to retire. And Dan Campbell said that, hey, he respects the heck out of him for making that decision. But so much of what Frank Ragnow was, it wasn't just the fact that, hey, he was healthy last season, or he was as healthy as he's been, or he was played so great. It's all that goes into the preparation for him to just be able to get himself on the field, the rehab process that it takes for him to be able to get out there for practice, and then you throw on top of the meetings and the hours that it takes just for him to get prepared to the point where he can participate. It's a lot. It is a lot. And Frank Ragnow ultimately felt that, it was his best decision to kind of step away and retire at this point in time. And Dan Campbell respects the heck out of him for that, so much so that he even threw out there that any of this contract talk that's been thrown out there about this could be some of the reason why Frank Ragnow retired. He said that is disrespectful. And I'm glad that he said that, because that was kind of a thing that was getting thrown out there, around the time that Frank did retire. And it was weird because I honestly had heard none of it. I didn't hear any of it until after he retired. So of course it was like, okay, wait, is this actually a part of the conversation? And we didn't really touch on it when we talked about his retirement video, outside of kind of me saying like, I didn't think it had anything to do with anything. And that, I think this was Frank Ragnow just taking care of himself, making a really tough decision as something that's been your life to this point, is stepping away from the game. That's what really matters at this time. That's where the focus should be. So I'm glad that Dan Campbell put the focus there to give the respect that is due for Frank Ragnow at this point, and that he loves Frank Ragnow. So that's really what he gave us on that situation. Again, Frank Ragnow, appreciate everything Frank has done for the Lions. It is sad. You could kind of hear it in his voice. It is upsetting to lose a guy like that means so much to the team, that represents the team so well. But ultimately, as he said, the train goes on. We like the draft picks that we made, Tate Ratledge, Miles Frazier on top of that as well. The free agents that they ended up bringing in recently, Tristan Cologne, as he said. I know it's Tristan Cologne. My bad on that. But he said that we haven't seen him yet, but we added Tristan Cologne to the mix, and he brought up Kingsley Eguakun specifically as one of those players, having back again the undrafted free agent from this past season out of Florida. So liking the pieces that they have, and the flexibility, the versatility specifically that they have up front. We're going to revisit that here in a second, but let's shift it up a little bit now, as he talked about how with John Morton, really the focus has been, first, so much of this OTAs, I think the focus is really on install. Having an opportunity to be a part of like, okay, no contact practice. What does that look like, right? We can't have contact. We got no pads on. You can put the helmets on, but that's what it looks like at this point. What is really the emphasis, at least at the level that I'm aware of right now, that I'm a part of, is the emphasis isn't necessarily on like, oh, who's the standout, maybe that, as much as it's like, let's get our things installed, right? Let's get the foundation of what we want this to look like. And so much of it right now is the learning process. Let's learn, let's get them to a point where when we get to training camp, now the competition ramps up and evaluation really kicks in. As to right now, so much of it is about making sure the guys are comfortable, understanding what they're doing, getting the young guys caught up to speed, and the new tweaks that are now happening with a guy like John Morton. And for John Morton, so much of what he talked about is focuses how can we isolate certain matchups. And he talked about that with Jamison and Jahmyr Gibbs and, of course, St. Brown and Sam Laporta, and that's the focus. And the real tweaks there are the ways that he tries to get guys isolated, but that's going to be the focus of a John Morton offense, is how can we get guys isolated one-on-one and take advantage of those opportunities. And like we talked about with the David Shaw video, so much of his offense in the 3x1s is about creating leverage, creating those opportunities to have that one-on-one opportunity. And that's what it sounds like the John Morton offense is going to look like, which we got a taste of in 2022, but that's how it's going to continue as we move forward. So give us some injury updates, like Tyleik Williams, who's not practicing right now. I don't even want to call this like an injury update, but he's not actually like practicing. He's kind of just going through walkthroughs for the Lions. But again, they've told us that they're being very cautious with these players, just making sure that they're right. So when that competition period really does begin, pads come on, training camp starts, that they're all ready for that. But he also did tell us with Malcolm Rodriguez, he's not going to be ready for the season. And he threw out November as kind of like a soft he could be ready by is sometime in November, essentially. He didn't want to give like an exact time period there, and he didn't feel super confident even throwing November out there. But I guess that's kind of the target point as of now. The broad target point for Malcolm Rodriguez is November, which definitely stinks, but it also is why it's so important of the Zach Cunningham's getting into the mix, the Grant Stewart showing things defensively, like those pieces getting it. Abraham Beauplan was moved off of, so seeing these other guys that can show that they're capable of stepping in right now, and Zach Cunningham, of course, is a key one there without Alex Anzalone as well, and it seems like he is getting a lot of high reps just from the highlights that they're showcasing. We saw in one of the last highlight clips, Jahmyr Gibbs seemingly kind of on a Texas route, beating Zach Cunningham, a little no-look from Jared Goff. I always catch those. Was asked who were the stand-up players. He said, I want to be careful on that because there are no pads on. But he gave names, Jamison Williams, Jahmyr Gibbs. He also came back and threw Rakestraw into the mix, a guy that they're focused on leaving him on the outside. And when asked of, okay, well, how's he going to see the field? And he's like, well, that's up to him. We're going to play the best. It's competition. That's up to him, how he gets himself on the field, if he gets himself on the field. But the focus is playing him wide, and right now it seemingly looks good. He said putting him at nickel a little bit, kind of dabbling in that last year may have been too much. We just kind of want to isolate and focus him in on one position. Plus, at nickel, he brought up multiple players that can play that role. Of course, Amik Robertson holding that down, but having the option to do that with Brian Branch, Avonte Maddox now into the mix, and Avonte could play safety too. So, and I think he is a safety, so you could put Avonte there, kick Brian Branch down. That's flexibility that you have. We've seen him on a few clips. Like DJ Reed, who he said DJ can play in the slot, which is something I think he's very capable of. Like I said, down the road, the best spot was, hey, your best three is Rakestraw and tearing out wide. You're not taking DJ out the field because he's that great. He's really good. And also what he's getting paid, you can put him in a slot. I felt that he was capable with this play style, even though he really hasn't done it going back to about 4 years. He really never plays in the slot, but he's capable of doing that. But right now the focus is Ennis on the outside. So I'm excited to see it. I'm a big Ennis Rakestraw guy. I loved Ennis Rakestraw coming out. So I think that he's going to be fantastic for the Lions in time. Now, when you go back to that offensive line and kind of what's the plan, the way that he worded it, seemingly as of now, the vision seems to be Tate Ratledge going to center, and because he kind of laid out like, okay, well, how important is it to have experience, at that center position? And because Tate really doesn't have that, right? It's kind of the skill set that you're translating to center, and he's young, and that's a heavy position to play early. But the way that he kind of shifted that focus is it's really important to have a guy with experience, if that's next to him as well. Kind of alluding to, in my opinion, if that's Graham Glasgow at guard and Tate at center, having a guy that's experienced next to him that can help him along the way, that also can be incredibly valuable. And he gave an example of a young player at center kind of emerging very quickly, having some of that veteran experience next to him. So early on, that seems to be kind of the way that they're pointing. That's the way that I would like to see the Lions point as well, and how this kind of all shakes out. Lions do have tons of versatility in the front, especially when you throw Tristan Colon now into the mix. As for Ahmed, he said most of it's kind of just walkthrough reps as of now. So there's nothing to say like I don't like the player. He loves the energy that he plays with. But in terms of like takeaways from OTAs for offensive line lineman, a defensive lineman, not a lot to grasp onto there, which makes a ton of sense without having that kind of contact. And again, we're continuing to work through. I'm working through that Ahmed video right now. And side of things, talking about isolating one-on-ones, he said the key is, they're getting those one-on-one opportunities, taking advantage of those, and then getting the ball in their hands, simplifying things so that we can get the ball in their hands, not making it overly complicated how we get it to them, and then letting them do work. And essentially, in my opinion, that's run after catch. Let them do work with the ball in their hands. Let the playmakers make plays. And that's that's what a John Morton offense looks like at its core. That's what a David Shaw offense looked like at its core, who is now our passing game coordinator. So all of that makes sense that's the expectation. And we also did a little clip from one of our latest live streams on why you should trust Dan Campbell in terms of hiring coordinators and kind of finishing and filling that back in. And I think that's a worthy checkout. Kind of what really the takeaways were today from the early presser. I'll leave it there. And again, we'll come back with takeaways eventually when I get back home to talk about what we learned, I guess, so far today and what we learned from OTAs today. So thank you, Prop, for watching, and I'm out.